Welcome. I'm Crispy, and I'm here to talk a little bit about what happened and what I've learned from my in-person game last night, and how hopefully that'll help me be a better role player and run better game sessions in the future. And hopefully something I'm going to share with you from my experiences will be of help to you. I wanted to talk a little bit to start off something that I unfortunately, in my exuberance and excitement from the game from 2 weeks ago, so not last night, but a week from last night, I just got so sucked into it, and everything seemed to be firing so well, and the session was just so exciting and dynamic that I let it carry on just 10 or 15 minutes too long. And the reason why I say that is because I do think it's very important, if at all possible. And I know that this may sound to some of you that you just hate this idea, but in my experience, it not only is, it just makes the life of me as a game master so much easier. And that is to end the session before the big climax or just as it's starting, to have that cliffhanger moment. And I'm getting that. So you should never just take my word for it. You should always try this out, of course. But when I've done that successfully, it just made for another great session to follow up. Here is Brian Jamison talking about cliffhangers. I'm going to share this with you. I've highlighted this section here because I think it's just so important. He says this: never wrap up a session at the conclusion of some great battle or the end of a long adventure. And that's exactly what I did last week. Oh, it's too bad. It's just try to end on the cusp of something big or in the midst of a battle. This keeps the interest of the players high and gives you extra time to craft a terrific action-packed start to the next session. Make the cliffhanger as meaningful as possible. The bigger the cliffhanger, the more eager the players will be to return to the game. It's just so true. And I know this can be something that perhaps some of you are rolling your eyes already saying, oh, great. Every week, just as things are getting really exciting and we're getting to the climax, and then all of a sudden the game master closes his books and walks away from the table. And what a letdown, anticlimactic thing. But if each session starts with the resolution of the previous week's cliffhanger, then you still get that feeling of accomplishment as the player. I, as a player, would be very upset if every session, just as things seem to be really getting good, that was it. We call it just then. I mean, come on. Here, Brian Jamison goes on, and I wanted to share this other passage because I think it is also very apt. It says, once you spring the cliffhanger, end the game immediately. It's tempting to get suckered into letting the group have more action that setting. That's exactly what happened to me last week. It takes a lot of restraint. The strength of the cliffhanger lies in resolving it next time. Close your books, thank the players, and smile. The group may feign frustration and irritation, but they'll be hooked, especially if there's a payoff too. So next week, we don't just leave or hand wave the cliffhanger. No, we're going to start right in with that conflict. And that's what I struggled with last night, because we had this massive resolution, and there were a couple of cliffhangers perhaps, but they were just mini kind of unresolved things. The big bad, hellspawn that had been wrecking havoc had been killed the last week. He had been vanquished. We're now just burying the bodies to start off the session. There's a chance, there was some character development that happened a little bit, but it just wasn't the same kind of dynamic development that I think all of us would have preferred to have seen. And it also raises this other specter that I'm grappling with now, and I'm not quite sure how to reconcile it. So I'm excited to hear what your experiences have been with this. The concept that I'm referring to, and I'm going to share this PDF with you. This is me switching gears now. I'm looking at Sean Driscoll's book, How to Roleplay the Hard Way. And in his book, he makes this warning, and I think it's a really good warning. The problem I'm having is that I still feel the need in some instances to let's just skip this part because it's boring and we want to get to the next big conflict. We want to have the camera, the narration be focused on conflict and not just the let's say the mundane nature of a life, or the simulation of the world, but in its mundane aspects. He points out this, and he's referring to this. I've highlighted the last bullet point here as well. We'll start with that. He says, we fly our ship to the next planet. Well, there's a lot of hand waving that just went on to say that. He says runners, or if you want to substitute game master for runner, runners or game masters are more likely to use the last example to allow for fast travel in a session, such as you guys fly your ship to the next planet. However, runners or game masters should try to minimize their controlling of game players. Rarely do runners tell the players what their characters try, because runners want the players to have agency with their characters as it fits in with the hard play style. So true. And yet, how do I, and I don't have an answer to this, but this is what I'm wrestling with. If we've resolved assuming that I didn't mess up like I did last week, where I didn't allow for enough of a big cliffhanger to start off the next session, assuming I did have the cliffhanger properly set up so that this last night's game session started with a big bang. Once that's resolved, I want the conflict, the narration, to be focused on something else that's dynamic, that's moving. There's things happening, but there will come a time that we need to have some downtime. So how do we do that? Like I was thinking of a couple ways of doing this. One would be just once that's over, once the conflict to begin the session is over, then do we just go to each player and say, okay, stop sharing this. I'll put the links again to these resources, or I'll list them so you can search them out in the video description, because I do think they're both well worth your time. They're both free resources, so there's no excuse why you shouldn't at least take a look at it. I think it's worth your time. So one would be, like I mentioned, just to, fade to black, or just, time passes. The next time we see you, you're doing, well, like, what are you doing where are you and what are you doing 2 weeks from now? Oh, okay. But then again, that kind of hand waves. Well, what did you do in the meantime? Like there should have been. So that's what I'm struggling with, is how do you do the fast travel? Do you just avoid it altogether? But in that case, does there just need to be an understanding between all of the players and myself as a game master that we're not going to be necessarily role playing every mundane thing in the world, because that would just be incredibly dull. So looking for feedback on this, because it's I want, as I focus more and more on layering conflicts and keeping that conflict going and the world dynamic and changing all around, players do need some downtime. How do they set that up? How do we allow for player downtime without becoming guilty of just moving the players around to where I need them to be for the next scene to work, if that makes sense. So that's what I'm looking at. Now, a couple other things I wanted to mention. I wanted to shout out our youngest player. He had missed the previous session. He sent me an email, apologizing for not being there, and saying that he had taken some time, and he's a young guy. I'm sure he's got a lot of other things going on, but he had taken some time to watch some of these videos and then watch some of the actual plays where people are trying to stay in character all the time. And he came prepared to do that, and it showed. He put on a clinic on how to keep your descriptions of location and action in character, moving. He never had any hesitation. He was right on it the whole time. You could tell he had put himself, whatever he needed to do, he did to put himself into the mindset of that character. And he was playing a character of it's a character class in Weird Frontiers called a luchador. And so he's this, I summon my eagle powers, and he's a combatant, but he has some wondrous abilities that he's been gifted with. And he described all of his moves just fantastic. He was so good at it, and it went so fast, and it left the other players, much more experienced players, just speechless at the table as we look over. What happened to PT? Like, why is he's so much better now than what he was before. And he's not that he's a terrible player before. It's just that he had taken to heart what we've been talking about on this channel and many other channels that are saying, look, you've got to focus on the role play. The role play is where you're going to get your biggest sense of enjoyment and fulfillment. And he did it, and you could just tell he was getting so much more out of that game session than he had previous. And I was just so happy for him because he had put the work in, and now he was enjoying the fruits of doing that work, of putting that effort in. I hope he can stay with it because it just was so great to see him do that. So really led by example as to what it looks like for a player to stay in character the whole time. And he really did. And it didn't even look like it was hard at this point. Like by the end of it, it just looked like it was second nature for him. It was fantastic. I had a chance to meet, as you saw, this is my third attempt at this video. I'm a little tired right now. It has something to do with the bunch of preteens that have no fathers in their lives or something that are running around, causing a ruckus in the neighborhood at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I'm a little tired. Hopefully parents can do some parenting there. That would be fantastic, but that's all right. Whatever. There was no lasting harm done, just some lost sleep is all. I had a chance to meet with Rick from 28mm RPG. My wife and I spent some time with him. He was kind enough to come up here, spending a little bit of his vacation time up here with me. And we had a great visit. It was so fun to get to meet him. It's so interesting when sometimes you meet people in real life and their persona online or their public persona is quite a bit different than their private persona. So I've once had a job many years ago where I would often run into celebrities and professional athletes and politicians and these kind of people. And it was always fascinating to me how they treated those that they weren't being paid to treat well, those that they didn't really have to be nice to. And some of them they just blew me away. They were so nice, down to earth. And you just think, this is someone that I could spend time with and it would just be easy. And then others where you think, boy, you're completely different. There is no relationship between what you put out to the world as who you are and who you actually are. And that's always disappointing when that happens. But Rick isn't like that. He's very much as friendly and upbeat and bubbly in person as you see on his channel. He's a really cool guy. I was very grateful to have met him. He did something so incredibly brave that I feel inspired to follow his lead. He invited 3 experienced game masters who are not shy about sharing their opinion, and I'm glad they're not. I think this is a strength, not a weakness. They are clear in what they consider to be good and what they consider to be lacking. And he watched his last actual play, a session that he admittedly, in his own words, he wasn't very happy with what happened in that session. And yet he watched this session with these 3 other game masters, which is nerve-wracking enough. But then he asked them all to be perfectly frank and honest with what they saw as areas for improvement. And he took that for 2 hours and take a moment to appreciate how humble Rick has to be to do that and then come away thinking, thank you for doing this. And thank you for, and there's a bit of a danger in this, of course, because if you're like me, I don't do this well. I'll hear criticism and I'll immediately start just burning the house down. Okay, got to rip all of this away. we're going right down to studs. Maybe even that wall has to go. The whole thing is gone. Like we're gonna salt the earth. We're gonna start over. Like we absolutely, and that's not a good way for improvement. You had received a lot of excellent advice from those 3 experienced game masters, and I hope that you look for incremental things to change, which is hard to do because if you're like me, you just immediately go, oh man, there's just 1,000 things and I have to get started on them all at once. That's not feasible. But you're an inspiration, Rick, to do that, to have that on a live stream and have that, put that out there for the world to see. I'm very inspired by that. I think that's a great idea, especially if those experienced game masters are willing to give some of their time to provide feedback, honest feedback, looking to hear some things to make your game better for your players, for you. Here's some things that you may not realize that you're doing that if you were to change would have a dramatic impact. And I, hopefully, if the stars align and I can finally get another online session in with my online game and the technical side works, hopefully, who knows, I would love to do that in the future, just as a way to, again, put myself under the magnifying glass. What could I do here to improve? Not everything is awful, but there's some things that I can improve, and maybe I don't even see them yet. So thank you for doing that, Rick. I thought that stream was fantastic. I'll put a link to it in the description below if I can figure that out. I should be able to figure that out. That doesn't sound too hard. And I encourage other game masters out there. What a great way to improve, to watch sessions together and say, hey, you see what you did there? Maybe if you change this, or think about changing this and how that would impact the session overall. And in the future, what could you do like that to improve it? So I hope to do that too. Inspiration. So a really nice guy, a great gentleman, and an inspiration for those of us that want to work on the craft and become better role players and better at running the game, which it's really, there's some crossover for sure between players and game master, but I find it a lot easier to be a role-playing player than to be the kind of game master that can encourage role-playing of his players. But that's what we're going to shoot for, and we're going to keep working at it. Hopefully you'll come back and we'll have more to report in our next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.